Some people lead by choice, others lead because no one else steps up. Funny thing is, the ones who never ask to lead are often the ones carrying the heaviest kind of trust. Ever wonder why people always look to you when things fall apart? Or why you keep giving your all, but end up feeling drained, alone, unseen? Hit subscribe if you've ever felt like the strong one in the room. Like this, share it. Because maybe someone else out there is carrying the same weight. Today we're looking at something small, just a soft rise on the palm, right under the index finger. Most people never notice it, but it might be holding the reason why leadership feels more like a burden than a gift. Let's start there. You ever notice how some people never ask to lead, but somehow they always do? They don't raise their voice, they don't step up first. But when things go quiet, all eyes find them. There's a weight to that kind of presence. And strangely, some of it lives right here, beneath the index finger, in a soft rise of the skin. They call it the Mount of Jupiter. But honestly, it feels less like a title and more like a place where silent responsibility settles. If our hands could speak, this part might whisper stories about the first time someone said, "Go ahead, you lead." Not because you were ready, but because no one else would. And from that moment on, you kept showing up, holding things together, staying composed, even when every part of you wanted to fall apart. We like to think we choose strength, but maybe some of us learned it too early, before it was fair, before it was safe. What if this small part of your hand isn't just a shape, but a map of every time you carried more than you had capacity for, and still didn't call it too much? The strange thing about people with that kind of energy is they don't brag. They don't ask for applause. They just are. And that just being is louder than most people's shouting. There's something sacred about that, something worn in, like a coat you didn't ask for, but learned to wear, because someone had to. Maybe that's what real leadership is, not ambition, not power, but the quiet agreement to hold the line, even when no one sees you doing it. And if that's true, then maybe this little mount on your hand knows more about you than any title you've ever had. Because before the mind decided who you needed to be, the body already remembered who you were. And what this place holds isn't ego. It's memory of pressure, patience, and that quiet kind of courage that doesn't show up in job titles, but always shows up when it matters. And from that memory, a certain energy begins to move. Funny how we rarely ask where power comes from. We just feel it, in some people more than others. And when it comes from the Mount of Jupiter, it doesn't scream. It hums, like a current running just beneath the skin, not loud, but steady, ancient. In energy work, this mount connects to the heart chakra, which kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because leading isn't a mental act. It's emotional labor. It's spiritual stamina. People think leadership is strategy, but we know, deep down, it's how you hold space when the room goes silent. It's the decisions you make when no one else wants to decide. It's carrying others even when your own arms are tired. And here's the twist. The more you show up like that, the more invisible your effort becomes. Ever notice that? That people start expecting your strength like it's just part of the background, like gravity. We think the energetic price of being the strong one is that you get admired. But sometimes what you really get is left alone, because your steadiness becomes a given. Your presence becomes permission, for others to collapse. And you're still standing. Maybe that's what the Mount of Jupiter absorbs, not just your leadership, but the emotional tax of holding it all together. If we could measure it, we might see how that energy builds up in the hand, tightening here, burning there, until the body starts whispering things the mouth won't say. That's the paradox. You're trusted because you never break, but you're tired because you never let yourself bend. And if that tension stays unspoken long enough, it becomes your rhythm. Until one day, you forget how it felt to be light. But energy doesn't lie, not in the body, not in the hands. And when that current runs too long without grounding, something subtle starts to shift. That's when we begin to ask, not just who we are for others, but who we've forgotten to be for ourselves. And that question, well, that has its own story to tell. Ever met someone who grew up too fast? Like, the world needed them to be strong before they were ever safe? You can see it in how they listen, how they hold back, how they measure everything they say, because somewhere along the line, being too much cost them something. The Mount of Jupiter often lives in those people, not as a crown, but as armor. We tend to think natural leaders were born confident, but most of the time, they were just born into chaos. And confidence was a survival instinct. It's not always charisma. Sometimes it's compensation. You learn to stay calm so others don't fall apart. You learn to lead so no one else gets lost. And you become the kind of person everyone trusts. But no one thinks to ask, "Hey, are you okay?" Because strength starts looking like silence, and silence starts looking like peace. But deep down, you know the difference. And this is where the pain creeps in. Because the emotional blueprint of this archetype says, if I'm not useful, I'm nothing. If I'm not holding it all together, I'll come undone. We don't always admit it out loud, but many of us carry that code. What if the praise we receive is the very thing that keeps us from healing? What if being the reliable one means we never get to be raw? And yet, here's the irony. That same energy, the one built on over-responsibility, also makes us incredibly magnetic. Trusted, respected, admired, but also a little bit lonely. It's the emotional tax of being the person others lean on when you've never had anyone to lean back into. And that tax doesn't show up on your face. It shows up in the hand, right there, where Jupiter lives and where pressure builds without making a sound. So maybe the real power of this archetype isn't in the leading, it's in learning how to come back to yourself without apology. And that's a skill most people never teach. But maybe your body already remembers how. If that felt like you, drop a comment. I've carried more than I said. Not for sympathy, not for validation, just to name it. Because naming the weight is the first step in putting it down. From here, we stop trying to understand the hand and start feeling what it's been trying to say all along. You ever seen someone hold a flashlight for so long they forget their own hands are shaking? That's what this kind of leadership feels like. Not the loud, chest-out kind, but the quiet kind, the one that guides people through messes, without ever saying, "Hey, I'm lost too." The Mount of Jupiter, it's that flashlight. It's the silent role you never auditioned for, the backstage job that somehow landed in your lap, because someone had to go first, and somehow that someone was you. Imagine walking into a dark room. Everyone's disoriented. You're holding a dim light, nothing fancy, just enough to see a few steps ahead. But here's the thing, people start following it, one by one. Not because you asked them to, but because they don't have a light of their own, and without meaning to, you become the path. That's what this mount represents, a body that learned to lead, long before the mind had time to choose. We think leadership is something you grow into, but some of us grow around it, like vines curling through fences, adjusting, bending, adapting, because we didn't have the luxury not to. If people could see the emotional scarring beneath the skill, they might think twice before saying, "You've always been strong." Yeah, you have. But what did it cost? Strength like this rarely comes from privilege. It comes from repetition, from being the one who holds steady while everyone else gets to feel. And sure, you learn to wear it well, polished, poised, reliable. But there's always that moment, late at night, when your own voice asks, "If I put this light down, would anyone else pick it up?" That's when the metaphor hits hardest. Because you realize you've been the guide for so long, you're not sure if you even know where you wanted to go in the first place. And maybe, just maybe, that's the part we're allowed to reclaim. The space between leading others and remembering we had a destination too. Ever wonder why the body remembers things the mind tries to forget? Like how your jaw tightens when someone expects too much, or how your hand clenches just a second before you say, "I'm fine." That's not random. That's memory. Not the kind you can recall, but the kind you carry. The Mount of Jupiter holds more than character. It holds patterns. We tend to think of hands as tools, but in truth they're part of our nervous system. And when your body spends years being the reliable one, the anchor, the fixer, it doesn't just shape how you act, it shapes how you store. Trauma isn't always the big stuff. Sometimes it's the little moments, repeated 1,000 times, when you felt the weight of responsibility, but couldn't say no. And over time, that pattern lays down tracks in the brain, in the fascia, in the way your muscles hold tension without you even noticing. Neuroscience calls it a predictive loop. Your body preps for the next burden before it even arrives, because it knows what's coming. It's learned the rhythm of overgiving, and it's bracing. What does that do to the hand? To this mount? It hardens, it rises, it grips, even at rest. Not because you're aggressive, but because you've been on alert for so long, you forgot what ease feels like. If the body could talk, it might say, "I trust you'll need me again soon." It's subtle, but constant. And the truth is, healing that isn't just about rest. It's about permission. Permission to soften, to let go without guilt, to not be the one holding the flashlight all the damn time. Some of us don't even know what that feels like, not because we can't, but because we were never taught that ease is allowed. But the body knows before we do. And sometimes, when we pay attention to the hand, when we notice what it's been carrying, we begin to remember not who we had to be, but who we still are underneath all that weight. There's a moment, usually late at night, after everyone else has gone quiet, where your body finally tells the truth. Not through words, but through the way your shoulders drop when no one's watching, the way your hand softens when you stop bracing. We don't always mean to hold so much. It just happens. One task, one promise, one person needing us at a time. And before we know it, our hands forget what it feels like to simply be ours, not useful, not in service, just human. If you can right now, bring your left hand up and place your right thumb gently on the mount beneath your index finger. No pressure, just contact. Let the hand remember itself. Let that place, the one that's been quietly carrying weight for years, feel something other than demand. It might take a moment. The nervous system doesn't trust softness right away. It's been too loyal to your survival. But if you breathe here, even once, you're telling the body something different. You're saying, I see you, not because you're useful, not because you hold others up, but because you're still here, still you. We think healing looks dramatic, but sometimes it's just this: a breath, a pause, a hand resting on itself without needing to do a damn thing. And maybe, if we gave ourselves more moments like that, we wouldn't feel so far away from who we used to be before the world asked so much of us. Try this again before bed tonight. No music, no deep intention, just a hand on your hand, like you would with someone you love. Because maybe you still are. You know what's wild? Most people never notice this part of the hand, not unless someone points it out. Even then, they glance, shrug, move on. But somehow, that little rise below the index finger held everything. All the times you stayed calm so someone else could fall apart. All the moments you kept walking so nobody had to feel lost. All the weight you didn't name because naming it might have made it real. Some of us don't lead because we want to. We lead because it's quieter than explaining why we can't. And the hand, it never argued. It just kept showing up, kept holding, kept steady. Until one day we look down and realize maybe the most consistent part of us was the one we forgot to thank. It's strange, isn't it? How much life you can carry in a place no one ever taught you to look. Maybe that's the point. Maybe some truths don't need to be shouted to be sacred. Maybe the hand always knew what the heart was too busy to say. And maybe, if we listen closely enough, we'll start to feel it. That quiet kind of power. The one that doesn't rush, doesn't try, doesn't even need to prove. It just is. You know, after all this, I still think the strongest people I've ever met never called themselves leaders. They just showed up, over and over, quietly, consistently, and most of the time, no one knew the weight they were carrying. That kind of presence. It doesn't come from wanting to be in control. It comes from caring. And maybe, in some invisible way, your hand has always remembered that, even when your mind didn't. If this spoke to something in you or someone you know, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it forward. This is Wisdom of Feng Shui, and we're just getting started. In the next video, we'll keep exploring what the body quietly reveals, not as fortune-telling, but as a kind of remembering. Because in the end, your space speaks. Wisdom listens.